Glad you're still with us. Over 50% of African leaders are above 65 years old. Some leaders have been in power for over 30 years. In Nigeria, the president is more than 50 years older than his average constituent. Teodoro Obiang of Equatorial Guinea is 82 and has been in power for 45 years. Denis Nguesso of Congo is 79 and has held on to power for 4 decades, 40 years. Cameroon's Paul Biya is 91 and has been president for 42 years. Aside Nigeria, these 3 cases of political endurance aren't unprecedented in Africa. But a recent article on The Conversation highlights the succession race in Cameroon, Congo, and Equatorial Guinea and how this could destabilize the region. And that gives impetus to this conversation. My guest is an African affairs analyst, Ibidolapo Ajayi. Thanks for sparing the time to join us. Aging leaders and the tendency to cling to power. How did we get here, sir?
Africa has a history, just like you enumerated earlier. It's something that's almost inherent in our nature as Africans. And typically what we've seen over the decades is that when we have situations where perhaps a military coup happens in some of these countries, those leaders tend to entrench themselves in power. And then you have situations just like these 3 countries that we're discussing today, where we have the oldest who have been in power for 45 years. And what tends to happen in those instances is that they entrench themselves and perpetuate their families in government, so that even if they should choose to leave, then they're trying to bring another member of their family into power. And that just prolongs the dynasty that we're seeing across some countries in Africa.
Is there any upside or contrast to the leadership styles of Africa's aging leaders versus younger leaders on the continent? Do we even have enough of that to make a comparison?
I don't think we do. I think the data is not there, really, because there's been a lot of instability across Africa. You've had military coups in some countries in West Africa, where we now have young military leaders. And depending on how long they stay in power, then maybe we can look at the data. But then you have progressive countries like Rwanda. I wouldn't necessarily call Paul Kagame a young man, but you are seeing a lot of development there. You have countries in Southern Africa like Botswana that's doing very well. And so the data is not enough. But one can also look at perhaps if there's been any pros or any benefits that these aging leaders have brought to bear in their respective countries. And I'm sure that their supporters will point to things like maybe economic growth, especially for the oil producing countries amongst them, and that they have used that to develop infrastructure in certain areas, maybe agriculture, telecoms. So, but to your question, the data is not really there. So that tends to help these leaders push an agenda that them having that stability to be in power for so long perhaps is best for their countries.
I have a bit of a worry from what you just said. You talked about the mix of young military leaders that we're having, the kind of leadership that is now coming up. Data currently is not enough, but what kind of data will we be working with in the future if this trend does not stop in terms of a crop of young military officials, taking the path to leadership through coups, for instance?
It's going to be a situation where there has to be continued agitation for all these military leaders to facilitate a democratic handover. But then they will come back and say they've given democracy a chance and all it's done is lead to corruption. So it's almost an endless race, whereby you will not get situations where you have sustainable government by democratic leaders in these countries to be able to gather enough data to show the progress that they are making. But there just has to be continued belief that a proper democracy is the way to go in all these countries that we have military leaders. But how that is going to happen, we'll all have to see.
All right, let's stay on track. I just needed to get that off my head. We've seen leaders pee on themselves or be incoherent at the global stage. What are the what worse implications are there for, I mean, this aging population on Africa's foreign policy and our global relationships?
In my opinion, I feel the optics definitely are not good when you have leaders that are incontinent and they're being seen on the global stage. It's not a good sight. But the way I look at it is these Western countries that they do deals with, they feel that as long as their interests are protected, they are not too worried. You don't see countries like the United States urging these leaders to step down. You don't see European countries urging these leaders to step down. So that just goes to say that they're getting some amount of benefit from having these people in power. So for them, they don't care how badly they look on the international stage. Some leaders will also point to a country like the United States that have a president that's already approaching 80 and one that is about to hit 80, looking to be the next president of the United States. So they will have a good reason to point to those examples. But then we really want to see a new trend in Africa where younger people are taking the reins of these countries, people that are competent, and we have an unlimited human resource, qualified people in Africa that can do a great job. But the worry now is that with these three countries that we're discussing, it's going to create some fractious divide within the countries, because once they're trying to pass power on to family members, then it becomes something that can lead to division and that can cause problems. The only exception in this case is Paul Biya, that has really not involved his family members in political affairs or government. And it's going to be interesting to see how that country resolves its succession issue.
Yeah, curious thing you said there, I'd like to explore, but I'm going to hold on to it. The external factors, subtly or overtly, you know, encouraging this perpetuity that we have. Let's go back to the article that, you know, inspired this conversation and look at the succession race that is in the offing in Cameroon, Congo, and Equatorial Guinea. What can you tell us about this succession race?
Well, let's start with Cameroon. Cameroon, like I said, Biya has a stronghold on the military. It has helped him to stay in power for this long. And because no member of his family is in government at present, so it's going to continue to be a situation where we'll have to keep an eye on to see who the contestants are that are going to try to succeed him. And the challenge is they still have a lot of issues in the Anglophone parts, where you have secessionist people that are looking to create a new, different agenda. So having a leader emerge that can keep a hold of the military reins and also be able to calm all the issues that they have in that part of Cameroon is going to be very interesting. But right now, there is no clear direction as to who is likely to succeed Paul Biya in Cameroon.
Okay. What about Congo and Equatorial Guinea? Is there something you can tell us about them as well?
With respect to Congo, of course, is grooming his son, and that is going to be something that will cause concern amongst the majority of people from Congo Brazzaville, because it's just likely to create another longevity when his son, if his son succeeds him, we're going to probably see another hold to power that might just take forever before they see any semblance of a real democracy. So that is what we expect from Congo Brazzaville. The same is expected of Equatorial Guinea. The only problem with Equatorial Guinea is that his son is seen as somebody that's been very, very steeped in corruption, doesn't have a good image in the eyes of the world, and that is definitely going to create a lot of issues within Equatorial Guinea.
I read that about that gentleman, and in Nigerian palace we call that kind of person guy man, you know. He likes his pleasures, certainly. All right, yes. let's talk about the author's concerns about how the succession race is going to affect regional stability. Yeah,
I mean, there is going to be a lot of issues within the region, because these are three major countries in Central Africa that are going to have their agent leaders at some point exit the stage. And that is going to create a bit of instability, especially when it comes to their relationship with the foreign world and doing business with the outside world. There's been a lot of infrastructural growth in these countries, if we're to be honest, because they have seen a lot of growth in the oil sector. In Cameroon, agriculture and telecoms has seen a lot of growth under Paul Biya. So if we don't get the right kind of leaders taking over, those are all going to be at risk. And the countries that invest in these countries are going to have issues being able to do business with whoever succeeds these leaders.
Yeah, talking of business, what are the implications of having aging leaders on African economies?
It's not good, really. The implications are not good because they are not able. I mean, we're in the 21st century and we're having leaders that have been there for 40 years plus, and they just basically cannot relate to the current issues that are facing the world. So there is no reason to color this in any other way that this is not good for Africa. We need young, dynamic leaders to step up that understands issues, whether it be global warming, whether it be international trade, whether it be technology, because now we're living in an AI world, and just understanding how those things can impact and help the young people in these countries to tap into the opportunities that those bring is very, very important. And you need leaders that understand the issues and that can get an economic agenda together that will help to continue to grow their country's economies and GDP. And without doing that, we're just going to have countries that are not really achieving their potential, such as these three countries we're looking at. There's so much potential that we have in Africa. The resources, natural resources are there, but we need leaders that can harness it to the benefit of their citizens.
Okay, let's go back to your submission about external factors. When we talk about this, to be honest, I might not understand all the complexities, but I often have mixed reactions when we talk about how these external influences are, impacting on these leaders perpetuating themselves. It comes back for me to the question of our individual will as a people to allow such influences to continue to hinder our progression. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about how these external factors play a role in encouraging this perpetuity that we have with aging leaders, and maybe some tricks that we can employ to extricate ourselves, even if it's over time.
It's a very, very difficult situation that some African countries find themselves, because when you have leaders who are more interested in lining their pockets, securing wealth for their families, the general good is of the least interest to them. And that's what's going on. And basically, when these countries that they do business with are able to take advantage of the natural resources in those countries and look the other way and see that all this evil is being perpetrated in these countries, they are not going to make it happen. So it now depends on what the citizens of those countries want. We've seen, these are the reasons why you see coups in some countries in Africa, because basically those military folks are looking at this and seeing their resources being taken advantage of, and they decide, what, this is enough, we're going to take control and just change the narrative. And we're seeing that in some West African countries. So without advocating for military takeovers in countries, because that really doesn't always solve the problem, people need to start understanding that they need to get connected to whatever process the country has in place for ensuring a decent and lasting democracy and electing leaders that can show that they have the understanding of what it takes to take their countries to the next level. With these three countries, it's going to be tough, but there has to be a collective will amongst the people. And there has to be that decision amongst the people that, we want to have enough of this foreign interference, enough of these agent leaders selling us short and allowing foreign influence to take advantage of our resources. We need to use our resources to develop our own countries and reduce reliance on these foreign countries, because the more we take money from the World Bank, the IMF, the more we're indebting ourselves to these organizations, and by default to the countries that are controlling them.
Again, I'm curious, when we talk about the will of the people, the tools available is advocacy, activism, democracy, and that election and voting characterizes how we, actually practice it. But we've seen what has been happening across the continent with that. We've seen what is being done with constitutional term limits, Are there any other options to improve peaceful and timely transitions of power in Africa? Because if you ask me as a layman, I will say we seem to have exhausted all available democratic and peaceful alternatives.
You're absolutely right. Honestly, we are not short of advocacy. We are not short of enlightening folks on how they can benefit from democracy if they are involved. But despite all that, it seems not to be resonating in some of these countries. And it's either they've resigned themselves that there is no other way other than to subject themselves to leaders like we have in these three countries and just hope that they do what's in the best interest of the country. Or the alternative is what we've seen in the African countries that have military coups. And we really don't want that to be the story of Africa, where most of in this century, we're having countries still being led by the military. People have to be able to determine who govern them. But when these opportunities are being limited because we have sit-tight autocrats and dictators in place, it's really, really a difficult one. And I agree with you that we pretty much exhausted all those opportunities, or we can just hope that we can continue to see some progress. Maybe, in our lifetime, we'll see things change for the better.
I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here. This is a slight deviation, but still in context of what we're talking about, and that's the definition of democracy. Over time, this is not something we grew indigenously in Africa. This is something we collected because we saw the benefits. But our reality and what we have in the Western world don't seem to have any sort of alignment. Is it possible for us to maybe reimagine the kind of democracy that we want for ourselves in Africa? It could, now I'm going a stretch. Some people might put me on the wire. It might be a mix of the military and democracy. It might be parliamentary system or a refined kind of, parliamentary system that's suitable for our needs. What are your thoughts about redefining democracy in a way that will work for the context we have in Africa?
Very good question. And I think you actually answered the question yourself. I think we need to define what works for us. Just taking what works in the Western world and just basically replicating it in Africa has been proven not to have been to the best of our interests. In some countries, it has worked, but probably in a lot of countries, it hasn't worked the way it's designed to, because the will of the people is not often reflected in who the leaders that we see. There's so many countries that we can point to in that regard. I believe each country should figure out what works for them, based on the way they are structured. We've seen that the presidential system has not always been the best. The countries perhaps that have used the parliamentary system has perhaps had a bit of a better result. And I think once each country understands the structure that is best, will help them elect or put people in power that are able to agitate their concerns and harness the resources they have to develop their country, then we will begin to see some better results in Africa. I'm not an advocate for military rule. I feel that is not always conducive to how we want our leaders or leadership to be in Africa. But one will struggle to argue that you are not seeing some results with some of these young leaders that have taken over power through military coups in some countries in Africa. So And that creates an avenue for other countries to look at that and say, you know what, if it's working for them, why not us? You know, but at the end of the day, the electorate, the masses, the citizens should be able to decide this is a kind of government, this is a kind of political structure we want to have, and let's come to the table, even if it's like through a conference or whatever, let's have a discussion around what works for us, and let's put it together and go for it, you know. But I will always say the military option should be the last resort. It's not always
the best
good outcome.
Yeah, I do see your point there. This, we're almost out of time, but this question, not the last, hopefully, is almost like a rite of passage in conversations about, you know, moving forward in Africa, and that has to do with regional bodies, like maybe AU, ECOWAS, and the likes. But when you now think about it, the leadership of these bodies happen also to consist of these leaders, some of these leaders who are perpetuating themselves in power. So I'm actually wondering, is there any role they can really play here?
In my opinion, really very little. I mean, outside of the African Union, most of the regional ones haven't really been that effective, to be honest. We've seen situations where we had military coups in some West African countries, and the chairman of the ECOWAS body really, with all the pronunciations that were made, could not deliver on any of those threats, and those governments are still in place. And, you know, so sometimes, you know, they need to understand what they're dealing with. I'm not sure those regional bodies are as strong as they appear to be. It's in terms of trade, perhaps, yes, that might be happening, but in terms of leadership, it's yet to be seen if there's any effective leadership at the level of some of these regional bodies.
Now, this is my last question, and maybe you have to take about 40 seconds to respond as best you can. What prospects do you see for a new generation of African leaders that will drive the change that we're looking for?
The prospects are very good. There are too many brilliant young leaders that are exposed, you know, either by Western education or by training, that have the capacity to take their countries to the next level. I have no doubt in my mind that if the people in each country could just open their eyes and just be able to see beyond the pain, beyond the poverty that they're dealing with in most cases, and not allow you know, the politicians to buy their future with goods, and just open their eyes and see the potential that they have in the potential young leaders in these countries. I believe Africa really could rise up to be that shining light. And that's the reason why we see a lot of these foreign countries in Africa coming to take our resources, because they know we have everything to be great. And the hope is that we can see the young leaders come through to help achieve that.
I too hold that hope very strongly. Thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you for having me.